This is a moment in Jewish history. For about 30 years, Asia Restaurant in Herzliya served Chinese and Asian cuisine to hungry Israelis. It was owned and operated by the Nguyen family of Vietnam. They were one of about 300 Vietnamese refugees who ended up in Israel in the late 1970s. The following audio clip is from Associated Press news coverage from Israel, October 1979.
After 1975, the communists took over our country. They put myself in jail, my family, and all of the members work with the Republic of Vietnam regime, the Thieu regime. At first, arrived to Thailand and come to your country from Bangkok. We escaped from our country by boat, so we are called boat people.
War between North Vietnam and South Vietnam resulted in people fleeing in small boats. The Vietnamese boat people, as they were called, risked everything to flee communist takeover. One day in June 1977, an Israeli cargo ship spotted one such boat floating in the South China Sea. Captain Meir Tadmor was quoted later as saying, "We Jews know what it's like to be refugees, and God forbid we should withhold aid from such an unfortunate people or deliver them to the country they had escaped from." Thus began the journey of the first boat of Vietnamese refugees consisting of 66 people. Taking them in was the first official act by the newly elected Prime Minister Menachem Begin.
We always stick to our heart the kindness of the government and especially the Prime Minister Menachem Begin to give us a homeland while the other country were still reluctant to take us when we left our country to flee from the barbaric regime of communism.
An article from the JTA quoted one of the refugees, Dr. Tran Quang Hoa, a 32-year-old surgeon who thanked the Israeli authorities in an emotion-choked voice. He said that after the ship on which the group had fled Vietnam sank, 5 ships passed by their raft and refused to even give us water until the Israeli freighter rescued them. The refugees included 16 children and several pregnant women. Officials said about half of the refugees want to go to the United States and the rest will remain in Israel. Menachem Begin told the Knesset that the Vietnamese boat people reminded him of Jews fleeing Europe before and after World War II. He stated, "Now we have our Jewish state and we can understand what it means to be a refugee." His remarks brought an appreciative response from Aryeh Eliav from the leftist Shali party, one of Begin's staunch political opponents. Eliav rose and told his rival Begin, "I greet you, both as a friend and as an ex-refugee." Cabinet Secretary Aryeh Naor stated, "We remember the experience of our brethren during World War II who were seeking in vain for shelter." The Vietnamese refugees were grateful, but there were cultural differences. One told a reporter upon their arrival in Israel, "The truth is, I don't really know where we are. I have never heard of Israel before the Israeli freighter saved us." Israeli officials gave them fish and rice, common foods in Vietnam, and set them up in the southern Israeli city of Ofakim in absorption centers that usually housed Jewish immigrants from what was then the Soviet Union. Tuyet Noyan of the aforementioned family who opened the restaurant in Herzliya stated in a recent interview, "I remember Mr. Begin as having a warm and welcoming personality, but I could not understand a word he said because I did not know any Hebrew." Begin stated at the time, "We have never forgotten the boat with 900 Jews, the St. Louis, having left Germany in the last weeks before the Second World War, traveling from harbor to harbor, from country to country, crying out for refuge. They were refused. Therefore, it was natural to give those people a haven in the land of Israel." In a documentary on the subject, archival footage shows an enthusiastic Israeli trying to teach the new arrivals a Hanukkah song. without much success. One Vietnamese man is shown explaining to the others, in Israel, they have one lake and eat strange foods. The next wave came in July of 1979 with about 100 refugees who were temporarily in a refugee camp in the Philippines. David Levy, the head of the Ministry of Absorption and Housing, stated, "We shall provide you with solid land to step on." A second wave came in October 1979 with about 200 refugees, some being rescued in the middle of the ocean by an Israeli cargo ship. Others were taken from refugee camps. This included families, men, pregnant women, and children. The Israeli government had resolved to absorb what they could, but the new wave was not without controversy. David Levy himself was an immigrant from Morocco. I discussed the difficulties of Moroccan Jews in immigrating to Israel through clandestine channels during the turbulent political times of the 1950s in a previous podcast. So, while Levy, like many Israelis, were sympathetic to the refugee plight, he reminded the Knesset about the plight of the Soviet refuseniks who were being persecuted in Russia, and he discussed the difficult housing issues in blue-collar development towns such as Shlomi in the north and Sderot in the south. The absorption of the Vietnamese boat people also highlighted the ongoing struggle of the Ethiopian Jews, who were being denied the right to leave Ethiopia for Israel and faced dire economic times and political strife. While Levy made efforts for the Vietnamese, he also told the Knesset that Israel is doing everything they could on behalf of Jewish Ethiopians, who eventually came in large numbers to Israel in the 1980s. But despite the difficulties, the Vietnamese came and were welcomed. Many left and immigrated to France or the United States. Some eventually returned to Vietnam, and some stayed in Israel, becoming productive members of Israeli society, some even converting to Judaism. There were families such as the one who ran the successful Asia restaurant. One Vietnamese Israeli woman has published 3 volumes of Hebrew poetry. One became the head of a division of Israel's Bank HaPoalim after serving in the Israeli army. Just a handful of examples of what became of the Vietnamese boat people who were rescued over 45 years ago. This has been a moment in Jewish history. For questions or comments, you can visit benbresky.substack.com. Thank you to all the listeners, and Shalom.